This interview was recorded on Thursday, and it's about 40 minutes long, and I'd urge you to check out Celso's book, which is in English, called Acting Globally. It came out in 2018. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now, and it's very much an honor to have him on our 100th show, is Celso Amorim. He served as the foreign minister in the Lula da Silva administration's 2003 to 2010, and he also served as a defense minister for Dilma Rousseff from 2011 to 2014, where at one time he was actually named the best foreign minister in the world by Foreign Policy magazine. Celso Amorim, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Michael.
Can you start? We'll work backwards, but I'd like your thoughts on some things that and we'll certainly be talking about your work on behalf of President Lula, who we have spent a significant amount of time talking about on this show. It's recently come to our attention that President Jair Bolsonaro wants to appoint his son as ambassador to the United States. I will say, as an American, this is a very Trump-style move. so I could see how that thought process might work. What's your perception of that? And more broadly, what Bolsonaro has done to Brazilian foreign policy?
Well, let us start with your first part of your question. I think for Brazilian, for someone who, I'm a career diplomat originally, so it's very shocking for me. Unlike the United States, it's not a current practice to appoint people who are not diplomats as ambassadors. That happens. It has happened in the past. It's not forbidden. Especially the second term in Lula's government, there was no appointment of this kind, but it's not illegal as such. Of course, in this case, it's not only a non-diplomat, but it's his son, which makes it, let us say, a kind of a family affair. And it's especially, I mean, someone who has no experience actually in foreign policy. That's not my opinion. You know, this is the opinion of conservative people that have been commenting on that. And, you know, the institution, the foreign ministry of Brazil, Itamaraty, as it's known, it is highly respected in Brazil, and it has been highly respected actually around the world. I could see that, and that's not, I'm not saying that's on my account. That has been like that for 50 years or so. And so to have someone with no experience, practically no experience, is already very shocking. The fact that he's a son is something that never happened in Brazil, as far as I know. To Washington, it's not any post, by the way. And also, but I'm probably more concerned with another aspect, because all the opinions of this Congressman Eduardo Bolsonaro are extreme right-wing. He's seen, and actually has been mentioned by Steve Bannon as the representative of his movement for Latin America. So actually, what worries me more than anything else is the creation of a kind of an axis of extreme right-wing people between the United States and Brazil. So I don't know how are the relations between Steve Bannon and Trump now. I know that he has been actually dismissed from his post in the White House. Well, but you know, that actually reminds me of Guevara and Fidel Castro. I mean, when Guevara was getting too important inside, Fidel Castro asked him to go around the world, and that's what seems to me that Steve Bannon is doing. And so I think this very much extreme right axis is dangerous for our hemisphere and for the world. So this is what concerns me more than anything else.
Well, that's a powerful comparison. I think it actually makes perfect sense, the Castro-Guevara comparison, except, of course, in every regard in terms of
yes, I mean,
style, appearance, humanity. But yes. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? And then we'll go back into the kind of counter project that you were involved in as foreign minister. But when you look at and so much of the conversation in the United States and so much of what we're doing on this program, but also internationally, as people deal with the rise of far-right politics in a variety of contexts, United States, Brazil, India, the UK, so on, France to a strong degree. The debate is about conditions. What leads to this? What is it historically in terms of countries' economic systems? What is the racial histories? What are the modern failures of center-left governments? And more broadly, I mean, well, let me ask you that first. What do you think is giving the Bannons of the world an opportunity in this moment? What has led up to this?
Well, maybe in one word or a few words, is frustration with the results of globalization. I mean, I would say, which is not something surprising, because I think it would be expected. But at the same time, these people, this is very much like some countries in Europe in the 30s. You know, the people are frustrated with economic conditions, with everything that's happening. At the same time, they don't want to lose their privileges, or what they see as their privilege vis-a-vis of lower classes. So they tend to extreme right options. This is precise, and tend to see enemies in people who are somehow below their own status. I mean, that happened in Germany in relation to Jews or to whatever, but it happens now in Europe in relation to immigrants. Immigrants is also a problem in the United States. Well, in Brazil, we don't have these problems, although people are trying to invent them, actually. Brazil didn't sign, actually it signed, but it went out of the new convention on immigration, on global immigration. And this was pure imitation of Trump, because we don't have an immigration problem. I mean, the number of immigrants in Brazil is ridiculous. It's much smaller than the number of Brazilians who live abroad now. So, but there is this compulsion to imitate Trump. But coming back to the conditions, I think there are always the people who are, in a way, threatening your own situation. Maybe immigrants, it may be, say, Jews or foreigners or whatever. And I think in our case, this has to be seen internally as the people from lower classes threatening to have a better share in the GDP, in the income, and of course this was more or less tolerated when the economy was growing. But once the economy falters and let us say the cake becomes doesn't grow so fast, then the reaction of the people who feel threatened and who feel frustrated by these globalized world order or economic order, they tend to go against the poorer, and they tend to embrace radical far-right doctrines. I mean, of course, it's a very complex problem, and I'm oversimplifying it, but I mean, that's what I see in common between countries that are so different, like the UK and Brazil or Poland and the United States.
One of the things that's an exception in Brazil in some ways, at least it seems to me, and this is when we can, start talking about the Workers' Party record and the leadership of Lula and the foreign policy you charted with him. When it comes to the United States and the rise of Trump, it's very easy. Well, it's not easy, but one trajectory is the foundational, and it manifests in different ways depending on economic conditions and circumstance, but that this is a historically racialized and racist politics. And then you look at the modern Republican Party, Richard Nixon, and the Southern Strategy, and you can draw a straight line. As outlandish as he is, Donald Trump is in a clear tradition. And then you can also say that our Democratic Party has, in certain areas been at times more socially progressive and so on. But it has not. I mean, it has not been something that has protected people from the bad effects of globalization you mentioned. In fact, it's been an agent of globalization, of a very kind of corporate variety. So in some ways, the disillusionment, and now we see the resurgence of Bernie Sanders and so on, so it's much more complicated now. But the disillusionment in the United States seems very clear, the different causal conditions. What shocked us is that in Brazil this happened, and you have, you know, a president who pulled tens of millions of people out of poverty, who really increased the broad-based well-being. If President Obama did for the United States what Lula did for Brazil, we would say he's the best president that we ever had. So what's the sort of complication in the Brazil? Is it as simple as the economy slowing down under Dilma?
Well, I don't know. I mean, again, I mean, I don't know. I mean, who would say what precisely? Because in Brazil, of course, many people think that Lula is the best president we ever had.
Right.
The problem is that you have, let us say, the economic elite who doesn't want to go on dividing its part of the national income. You have many people in the lower middle class who feel threatened. I mean, and they tend to think in comparative terms. So it is all right for them to be not to be so well, provided there are people who are lower than them. But if these people are now growing, precisely the reason why the right wing in Brazil grew, it's precisely because Lula took, one of the reasons is because he took 20, 30, maybe 40 million people out of poverty. I mean, that's threatening for those who consider themselves, you know, it's a very stratified society. Brazil had slavery until very late in the 19th century. Actually, if you look at Brazil as it is today, although our forms of discrimination have been historically more subtle than those in the United States, or certainly South Africa in the past, but, you know, it's a very unequal society. And this has several dimensions, including a race dimension as well. So I think when people see that, I mean, the place for their children in school in universities might be threatened by quotas, or when they think that some part of their income will be taken away to improve or some time of the extra income would be taken away to improve the lot of the poorer people, they tend to, and especially when the economy becomes, as it did, slows down, and we had a very big recession. When that happens, you know, all these things together tend to favor these extremist positions, and which have, of course, racist connotations. It has connotations in terms of gender. It has connotations, you know. I saw now in Poland that they are trying to create kind of areas which would be quote unquote free from LGBT or gays.
Yeah.
Well, the same attitude, maybe not yet the same measures, but the same kind of attitude is now being seen in Brazil. And I mean, the way that many of the progresses that were made in relation to, let us say, the Brazilians of African origin or indigenous, they are being rolled back, which never happened before in Brazil. I mean, even if you talk to a conservative in the 90s or the 80s, or even the late period in the military dictatorship or military government, the conservatives would not agree with making more progress, but they would not try to roll back that. I mean, that had never happened, at least not in the scale that we're seeing now. And this has to do with labor laws. It has to do with the many human rights provisions, with indigenous people. As I said. And I think, again, I mean, what causes people to embrace these ideologies? I mean, I don't want to sound in any way that I'm discriminating against any religion, but I think some forms of fanatical religion have also something to do with that.
Yes, I mean, that seems very clear that whether you're talking United States or Brazil or Saudi Arabia or Poland, that especially when there's a vacuum created for a constructive politics,
No.
religion, fanatical religion, not all religion, obviously, but a fanatical religion came kind of.
Distrust from science, distrust from knowledge, distrust from culture. All these. I mean, if you read books about Germany in the 30s, it sounds familiar.
Right. You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.